Hey guys, today we're in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 22. Now David had fled to the Philistine city of Gath. He got found out. He acts crazy, and today we see that he flees to the caves of Adullam. Now the word Adullam simply means refuge. So it's the cave of refuge. In this cave is not very far from the same place where he would have killed Goliath. And so if you remember, it happened in a valley, and in the valley where he kills Goliath, and right up one of the hills would have simply been a bunch of caves. And so it's just an interesting place that though he's hiding and scared, he can literally see the place that just made him kind of become the new king, right? To bring him to this popularity. And so he's hiding, but he can see the place where he took Goliath, and he's hiding there. But what's interesting about the story is his parents find out. His brothers find out, and his family comes to him to give him support in the caves of Adullam. But not just there, but God sends him a small army. But he doesn't send him the best soldiers. He sends them the down and outs. He sends them the people that you really don't want. It says that the people who were in distress, they were in debt, they were bitter. The people who had nowhere else to go, they come. So they have David, his family, and now these people. And the Bible tells us they were about 400 in number. Now, we will find out later as we continue to read, but in the book of First Chronicles, we'll find out that David turns these people into what he will call the mighty men of valor. He turns these men into basically his Navy SEALs, right? He spends the most time with them. These men have nothing but respect, and they will go with David until death. And so they will be with him for the rest of David's life. And so he has these 400 men, but David went down from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he asked the king of Moab, hey, can my parents hide here? King Saul's out to kill me, and I don't want my parents to die. What's interesting is, why did he go to Moab? Well, you've read it a couple weeks ago. In the story of Ruth, we find out that Ruth will marry Boaz, and out of that there will become a son, Jesse, and this last son of Jesse is David. So David's great-grandmother is Ruth, and Ruth is from Moab. So he goes back to Moab, and he says, hey, my great-grandmother is here. And so these guys, so my mom and dad are part Moabite, right? So will you watch them? The king agrees, and they stay with the king of Moab for protection until David can figure everything that's going on. Now, our attention turns from David and it goes back to Saul. And Saul is in his castle, he's in his palace, and he's throwing a pity party, right? And he's saying, how could all of you guys do this? Because they found out that David now has a little army. He's hiding, he has a little army, and now he's upset and he's angry. And he says, how could you guys do this to me, right? And how could you guys allow this to happen? Notice it says in verse 8 that none of you is sorry for me, and discloses that you have stirred up your servant against me. You'll see this word me so many times, right? Saul only cares about himself, but there was a guy that we saw a couple chapters ago named Doeg. Remember, he was at the temple, he's at the tabernacle, and Doeg says, hey, I saw the son of Jesse. I saw David. And the priest there, Elimelech, right, gave him bread and gave him the sword of Goliath. And so Saul is furious. He calls for the priest to come, and all the priests that were at the tabernacle, they stand before their king, and the king says, how could you do this to me? And Elimelech answers, truthfully, I want to point out in verse 15, he says, for your servant has known nothing of all of this. He said, I didn't know he's your son-in-law. He's the killer of the Philistines. He's the one that has saved Israel. He was a great man. I didn't know all this that was happening. I was stuck at the tabernacle. And so Saul doesn't care, right? So Saul says, you shall surely die. He says, I'm going to kill you, right? And so he says, whoa, if you're going to kill me, you've got to kill all the priests here, because all the priests knew that David had ran and fled, and they didn't tell me. But here's what's interesting. The soldiers of Saul, they said they would not put out their hand to strike the priest of the Lord. Even though Saul hated God and didn't care about God, his soldiers, the people in his palace, they still feared God more than they feared Saul. And so they would not kill all of the priests, and they would not kill Ahimelech. But Saul wouldn't have that, right? So Saul says, Doeg, kill everybody. And Doeg does just that. He kills 85 priests, plus he kills both man and women, child, infant, ox, donkey, sheep, everybody that is from that town. I mean, he obliterates everybody. He doesn't care about these priests. But one of them escaped, and they came and found David in the cave of Adullam, tells him everything that goes on, and David said, I knew Doeg would end up telling somebody. And we can actually see this in Psalms 52. And he says, I know, and he tells the last priest, right, the son, says, hey, you can stay here with me. I'll do my best to keep you safe. What's amazing in this story is not just David goes to the caves of Adullam, which I encourage you to read Psalms 57, Psalms 142. He writes about being in these caves. But what's interesting is David went from literally the highest and the greatest to the lowest, right? From the highest to the lowest. And even though this cave of Adullam, or this cave of refuge, God does not want that to be his cave of refuge. God wants him to be the cave of refuge. He wants David to run to him and not to this cave in scare. What do we put our faith in? Do we put our faith in God? Or do we put our faith in what we think is best and what will keep us safe? Right? And so there's a great story here about David, that when he's scared, does he run to the Lord, or does he run to what he thinks is safe? We should always run to the Lord. He is our refuge. And that's why we see that in Psalms. He is our Adullam. He is our cave of Adullam. But so many times we will not seek the Lord for refuge. We'll seek our own caves where we think we can find refuge. Hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we will see you tomorrow in chapter 23. God bless.